Um, so this is a very important session, Youth in Democracy and Governance. We are a young world, both in terms of demography and in terms of democracies. As you would know that in terms of the demography, both India and the world population consists mostly of young people, of very young people. And the youth constitute a very important stakeholder in the shared future that we would be discussing about in today's panel. The Sustainable Development Goal 16 actually tries to promote the idea of accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. There is a broad agreement and a consensus now that there is no one-size-fits-all model of democracy. And every nation across the world, depending upon their circumstances and situations, comes up with varying models of governing institutions and models, so to say. Now, recently the world has emerged from a pandemic-ravaged situation, and there have been global supply disruptions, and needless to say, the youth and the young people of the world have been at the receiving end of such disruptions, whether it be in terms of education, whether in terms of health, mental well-being, and so on and so forth. Various governing institutions across the world have also innovated themselves in trying to meet up these challenges. Needless to say, the youth are the flag bearers of demographic dividend across the world. But we also live in a world where recently we have seen the great resignations. We also see massive layoffs, youth unemployment. But within this larger context, there are various positives to look forward to. And this is also the time where we need to center stage democracy and governing institutions and the role of youth in democracy and governance. So it is in this backdrop that I will open up our discussion. We have a distinguished panel here, and we'll give about 5 to 6 minutes to each of our panelists to share their views, and then we'll open it up for a Q&A session. Yeah, Meeta?
Namaskar. A very good afternoon to all. It's an honor for me to be part of this Youth20 Inception Meet and address the gathering here. To all the dignitaries on the dais, my co-panelist, moderator, the comparer, and the wonderful audience before me, a very, very good afternoon. As India presides over this 2023 G20, it actually prioritizes human-centered development and hence Vasudeva Kutumbakam, that translate to world is one family, that espouses the idea of universal brotherhood and the unity of all living beings. Shared future, youth in democracy and governance, this theme is not only apt in the whole of the G20 and Y20 meet, it is also the need of time as the next century belongs to the youth, today's youth. The youth is the most important and dynamic segment of the population today, and the role that youth can play, the responsibilities that they can take on will help create and shape the future of our one world. And we not only have to stand with them, we have to work alongside with them so that they can bring about those meaningful change in development, in rightful advancement as they move ahead. In general, when we talk about the future, it belongs to all of us, regardless of gender, ethnicity, age, or any other factor. And when we talk about shared future, we often talk about what it refers to a vision of society in which individuals, communities, and nations, they work together to create an equitable and a sustainable future for all. So it is based on the idea that everyone has a stake in the future. It's about shared resources that will shape the life of the people in the years to come. And it is important that everyone has an opportunity to contribute to this development and direction. But when we talk on particular, since the future belongs to the young people, importantly as they make up a large portion of the population, their voices Their opinion and perspectives must be heard and considered. So this requires collaboration, cooperation, a commitment to the common good, diversity and inclusiveness amongst all. Now again, overall it talks about a holistic and a long-term approach for creating a world that is peaceful, just and prosperous for us. And three aspects is important here. One is building inclusive and participatory institutions. So encouraging the participation of young people in all levels of decision making, creating opportunities for their active involvement in governance, and promoting the representation in institutional structure can lead to a shared future. Secondly, empowering young people through education and skill development can help them to participate in governance and become leaders in their communities. Recognizing the role of technology, in which we have seen especially social media that has given youth a platform to express their views, mobilize and engage with each other and even with decision makers. So as youths come forward to play an important role in promoting democracy, fighting corruption, fighting rigid provisions, including legal provision, they will be facing numerous challenges, complex challenges, and addressing these challenges will increase youth participation and create a shared future and help them being about successful and meaningful be as agents of change. Fortunately, in India, we are fortunate to have a government which is very keen and focused on developing and empowering our youths from all strata of life. And India, as we all know, is known as the mother of democracy. It values immensely the voices and participation of youth in decision-making process and in democracy and in matters of governance. So interestingly, the terms of political engagement, young people in India are increasingly politically engaged, which is, providing a voice for their need and interest. If you look at the global scenario, youth representation has a median age of 31. About 28% we have about young parliamentarians. But we look at India, it is doing better. The median age is around 29. The point to note is India is young and it encourages young leaders. Today, it has 40% MPs below the age of 50-55 and 13% below the age of 30. Yuva Shakti, the power of the youth, which is the driving force of India's journey, as Prime Minister Narendra Modi says. So India's youth have many advantages that they can leverage to drive positive change in democracy and governance. And not just India, youth has a major role to play in almost every country in their nation building. So because they are going to be the creator of the destiny of the world in the coming century. And I would like to end with a quote from ancient India's most young youthful leader, Swami Vivekananda, who 100+ years back has said that youth are the greatest strength of the country and the future of the country is shaped by the efforts of its youth. Very happy to be part of this Y20 Inception Meet. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Meeta. Meeta has very engagingly pointed out about political engagement of the youth and the median years of youth participation in political process in India being one of the lowest in the world. And that's one of the bigger takeaways from this. She has also pointed out about the vision of a society where individuals need to work together and for the sustainable future. So we'll come back to this in the Q&A session. May I now request Dr. Vikas to share his views?
Namaskar. Thank you, moderator. Thank you, Meeta ji, my dear fellow panelists. Youth is the buckle that joins innovation and development together. And when I stand here today, I want to talk about the civilizational identity and one area where my previous speaker was stressing upon on the idea of inclusion and innovation. Innovation certainly has a purpose. Innovation has a purpose to fulfill the aspect of development. But development is not just a means, but development is also an end. And in this regard, the idea of inclusion is very important. When we see across the globe, most of the nation states which became great power, they became great power because they considered their civilizational identity to be at their core. India also, in a sense, at the moment aspires to be a power. And in that sense, it also we can see whether it is in the arena of global politics or it is in the arena of domestic politics, the civilizational discourse or the civilizational identity of India remains at the core. And thus, I bring to you this idea of Atmanirbhar Bharat and digital India, how these two got interlinked. Many of you think that Atmanirbhar Bharat was a kind of policy intervention to boost economic growth. It was considered as an economic attribute. But deep, if you see, Atmanirbhar Bharat is not something just a policy consideration. It has deep philosophical and historical root attached to it. The very idea of Atmanirbharta is something which transcends the idea of self-reliance or self-growth. It has to do with this principle of welfare of all, Sarve Bhavantu Niramaya idea that is very core. That is considered to be the core of our civilizational identity, the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And thus, this Atmanirbharta that we see, and which is spearheaded by the youth. We have 65% of the population which are considered to be the youth, and they are at the driving seat. And there are three very specific dimensions of this Atmanirbhar Bharat, and which makes us rethink that it's not merely an economic intervention. The idea of connectedness, it is bringing the geographical connectedness together. It's the idea of convergence of values, that we have, there are times in human history when inevitable has to be accepted, and economy demands certain kind of interventions where we have to converge, and about the consensus of values, certain core values, certain overlapping consensus on core values concerning democracy and inclusion. And if we try to keep the Digital India campaign at this backdrop, we see that campaign has fulfilled this thing. We are the country which has moved from social inclusion to financial inclusion to data inclusion. In last 8 years, if you see, we have we have today around 840 million users connected to internet. And when we started this Digital India campaign, when India started this was around 240 million users. And if you see, I'll end up with giving a story how these Digital India campaign and this ecosystem of Atmanirbhar Bharat is leading to innovation where youth are really participating. And this is a story from Northeast India. Recently, I met someone who was involved in a very innovative health practice, which was about creating 10-bed ICU system, that in all the districts across state, there has to be created a 10-bed ICU, which would be connected with tele-facility, and doctors sitting in premier institutions or district headquarters can monitor those ICU, and precious life could be saved. All it required was 40 lakh of investment to create one 10-bed ICU facility in one district of India. But it was taking the ICU facility in the remotest corner of the country. This story is something which brings together the public-private partnership. Of course, the health infrastructure is given by the district health or the state administration, the innovation of the youth and the health of the country. With this, I conclude. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Vikas, for bringing out shaping the thoughts around public-private partnerships, because these are also a part of governance and institutions, local institutions, how they are innovating in terms of governance structures. Dr. Vikas has also pointed out about the different dimensions of Atmanirbhar Bharat, how it transcends the idea of self-reliance, and also the social, financial, and data inclusion that is brought about by the digital mission, and also to look at the ecosystem of Atmanirbhar Bharat and digital mission in its entirety. Let us now move on to Ankur. Yeah. You want to speak from there? You can speak from there.
Honorable Chairperson, esteemed panelists, invited guests, delegates, and the youth participants. At the outset, I would like to extend my warm greetings and also congratulatory wishes to all the youth participants coming from different parts of the state and also different parts of India, and also the G20 member countries. At the outset, I must say that I am 31 and I am teaching political science at Kumar Bhaskar Verma Sanskrit and Ancient Studies University. So why I am saying I am 31, that I truly feel that I belong to this youth and young generation. And why I say that I work in that particular institution is, by and large, the students that I deal with on a mundane basis are from socially and economically marginalized background. So when I try to understand democracy, then essentially I also carry the aspirations and expectations of those students that come from socially and economically marginalized background. Now, when I was looking at the theme of our panel, it is about the shared future and the role of youth in governance and democracy. Now, when I try to understand the trajectory of evolution of Indian democracy, I happen to classify it into three temporal classification. The first phase, the initial decades of consolidation, the intermediate decades of resilience of Indian democracy, and the recent decades after 1990s of the deepening of democracy in India. And across all these three different temporal classification, I must say that the multiple stakeholders took their important and significant roles, and the role of the youth has been credible, be it the JP movement of 1975, be it the Assam movement in 1979, be it the India against corruption movement. We see that across all these different movements, a bunch of young student activists participated, and eventually they graduated from those movements, and eventually they entered into mass politics. Even the Honorable Chief Minister of Assam, Dr. Himanta Biswa Sarma, sir, and also his colleagues in the Council of Ministers, we see that those people are primarily having a student activism background, right? So I see that in the process, many leaders, both at the national and regional level, have come up, and they have immensely contributed to the way how democracy has, appeared in India, right? And now students and the youth have essentially contributed economically, politically, in terms of decision making also. However, the question is that when I looked at the sub themes of our panel, one of the sub-theme that really attracted my attention was the student-centric governance, right? So when I try to understand the student-centric governance, essentially I think about the education system. What has been the role of the state in giving the shape to the kind of education which has been given in the country? And that engagement with that process eventually brings two parameters. One is, I try to understand what is the role of the state in providing access to education, right? So the accessibility criteria is the first thing. And secondly, the second criteria that I found to be interesting is the outcome, right? The outcome of the education system or the quality. So when I try to understand the first criteria, the role of the state in terms of providing accessibility to education to the students, I must say that India started the political economic journey as a mixed economy. The state started considering certain things as part of the public goods, and education being one of them. And so eventually we see that education, the 1968, the policy was brought again in 1986, which was again revised in 1992. And the 1992 document that talks specifically about the issue of equity in terms of education, to provide elementary education on an universal ground to everybody. And eventually we see that through the 86th Amendment of Indian Constitution, elementary education up to the age of 14 was made universal. And also to make sure that the dropout rate is contained, the government also started serving midday meal, right? So because poverty is one of the issues generally which is closely attached with the understanding of India. Now, this is about the elementary education. Even in higher education, I would like to start with one example. I come from a lower middle class family, and starting from my higher education up till my PhD, I have studied in the best of the universities in India. And trust me, I didn't have to pay even 15,000 rupees as fee. But in return, in form of fellowship, in form of scholarship, I got more than 10 lakhs even before I joined my job. Right? So this was possible because even in terms of higher education, even though this has not been made universal, but the education ministry, the social justice ministry, and also the other organizations and entities like UGC, and the other branches like ICSSR, ICPR, ICHR, and for the science background, CSIR, and the other bodies, they have pumped in a lot of money to fund research and all other things. So I think those who are capable of being inquisitive and they keep on searching for new avenues to fund their study, they can definitely find a way. And in that case, I think that the role of Indian state has been credible. And now see, in the post-1991 period when India adopted the LPG scheme, the liberalization, privatization and globalization, in the wake of the adoption of the structural adjustment program, many people, including political scientists and economists, they started alleging that there has been an withdrawal of the state from the public sphere, right? And the state is becoming less and less welfare. But I think in terms of the education sector, still India is taking a very big role, and it is playing the pivotal role in terms of giving access to education through by showing concern for equity and inclusion, right? So that is one thing. And secondly, the second part of my thing was about the quality or the outcome, right? So I think the NEP, I was about to tell something about the NEP, but I think there is a possibility of time, and if questions come, then we can deal with that later on. All right, thank you so much, ma'am. So on that note, I would like to conclude my speech. I hope it's a very good learning experience and a very good exposure for the students and participants coming from different parts. And on that note, I'd like to wind up my speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Ankur, for talking about deepening of democracy in India and the credible role of youth in shaping the democracy. Ankur has also very nicely spoken about the role of the state in shaping education, particularly elementary education, as well as the inclusive policies of higher education, and most appropriately pointed out the issues of accessibility and outcomes and quality. So let us now move on to our final speaker, Mr. Abhinav Sharma.
Yeah.
You'll speak from there?
Yeah, I'll speak from here. Thank you, and namaste everyone. I know it's evening time and all of you are very tired, but this is the most important discussion, I guess, for the day, because this is directly related to your participation in the democracy and governance. A few years back, a politician from Russia said something to me which basically shaped my imagination when it comes to the question of youth in democracy and governance. He said that when he was our age, that when he was in his 30s, the life expectancy was around 50 years. So they would plan for the next 20 years and think in those terms, whether at the personal level or at the political level or at the social level. But he said, see, I'm 80 years today and I'm still healthy, I'm alive, and I'm perfectly fine in doing my work. So when you people are planning for your future, do not plan for the future of the 70 years of life expectancy. Plan for perhaps that you're going to live more than 100 years or 90 years of the age. And this is why the future, because it belongs to the youth, we are going to live for a longer duration than the life expectancy today. It is very important for us to be actively involved in the question of democracy and governance. Now, as the different member countries and entities of the G20, not all of them are formal democracy, like in the sense that not all of them have elections on a regular basis. Some of them have indirect elections, some of them are kingdoms, some of them have different forms of consultation and inclusion of youth in the political process. So as the moderator in the beginning pointed out, there is no one-size-fit-all approach. There are different forms of governance, there are different forms of democracies themselves, like from the liberal democracy of the West to, let's say, the model of the South Korea or the model of the Turkey. So we have to have a wider view and a deeper understanding of the issues at hand, about the governance and about the democracy. I would say that democracy is about, let's say, inclusion of the people in the decision-making process. The process may differ from country to country, from different context to context, and I don't think that anyone has any right to go and impose its model on the other country. But I think all of us agree in the G20 that the wider participation of the people in decision-making is the minimum what is required, whatever form it might take. And when it comes to the youth, as I've told, that it's not the question about the involvement of youth in the future, it's the question of involvement of the youth in the democracy, in the political decision-making, and in the governance issues as of today. And this is very important today because in today's world, we have seen there's a crisis of democracy, especially liberal democracy in many parts of the world, especially in the Western Europe, especially in some of the advanced countries, that there's a falling interest of the youth in the democratic process. There is falling participation in the election. There is extreme ideological polarization in several of the countries. We have seen in the case of the US election, the last US election, that how it was extremely polarizing. And I think these are the challenges which we as the youth are going to face in the future. One reason driving that is the advent of social media and the advanced communication technologies, which has at one side empowered the youth to participate in the democratic process, in the political process, but has also, I would say, sharpened the political views and the ideological views to such an extent that in some democracies it is becoming difficult for people or the societies to arrive at a consensus. In this sense, I see that India is a bright spot because what we have seen in the last 1 decade, and even I would say from the 1990s onward, there's a deepening of democracy in India. India, as you know, is a very large country, it's a very complex society, it's a very diverse society. But in the last 30 years, what we have seen, that the communities which were before 1990s or the 1980s were neglected or marginalized, they have become actively involved in the politics. And this process is ongoing as of today. The new caste and communities which were extremely poor, extremely deprived, are now becoming politically empowered, and the political empowerment and the movement of those communities, of the subaltern communities, is led by the youth. So I think in that sense, India provides a counter view to the worldwide trend in many of the countries where is declining interest in the democratic process. In India, what we see is the widening of democracy, the deepening of the democracy, especially in the last 1 decade or so. So I think that is the starting point where we can pick up the discussion, our deliberations in the G20 as to what are the factors which are working in India, what are the challenges in India and in other parts of the world, and how we can arrive at a consensus about the future of democracy and future of governance. And when we talk about governance, people, I think that it is not just about formal state governance. It should not be just about formal political parties. Like recently in the pandemic and in the lockdown, we have seen that how youth in India and also in many of the other countries, how they self-organize themselves to ensure there's supply of medicines, food to the needy, their societies, their localities are well provided for, the vaccination drives are done, and all of this was done by the youth without the help of the government or any formal mechanism. So I think when we talk about the governance issues, I was discussing this with the Suvesh Pandey, who is the track chair for the this theme. He said that community governance is also a very important focus area on which we must focus in the next few months when we will have the pre-summits and deliberations on these themes. So the scope of governance should be widened from the formal government processes to include self-governance, community governance, the self-help groups, and also the ability of the youth to organize. And I think what is most important, there are some academicians who might disagree, the student politics in university needs to be encouraged. Now, I'm not sure in how many countries we have vibrant student politics in the university campuses and the elections. In India, we have in some states, we don't have it in some states. But that is very important because that is the beginning, that is the starting point for the youth when they start engaging with the big questions of the day. Now, some senior people, especially the professors, the vice chancellors, fear the student politics. They say it might become very destructive. Sometimes it's very violent, anarchist. But we have to accept that that is the learning phase for the youth. They are getting involved in mass mobilization, political mobilization, in the political questions for the first time. So I think we need to regulate it, we need to guide it, and we need to encourage more and more student politics to ensure that the leadership of the future is ready in all the democracies. And of course, different countries can have different model for it, but I think that is the third point which is very important when we talk about the democracy and the governance. The fourth point is, see, we live in a world which is extremely unequal, and this is something which we have to realize. India is also a society where you have extreme prosperity and extreme poverty at the same time. And that is the case in most of the countries. And when we look at the world as a whole, you have extreme inequality within the countries. So I think when we talk about the democracy and governance, we should not forget the last person in the line. The philosophy of Antyodaya, the rise of the person standing in the queue at the last point, that is very important. When we talk about the youth, it's not just about the students and the people in the premier universities. It's not just about the people like you. It's also about the youth which is working in the bricklines. It is also about the youth which is working in some as a farm laborer or the agrarian laborer. How do we involve them in the democratic process, the political process, and the questions of the governance is something we need to deliberate upon. And I'm very sure that the delegates present here, our track chairs and other official delegates of the Y20 will be taking up these questions and have a more wider democratic look of the question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhinav. Abhinav has pointed out very important points like the crisis of liberal democracies, falling participation of youth in liberal democracies, polarized ideas. He's also spoken about the rise of the subaltern in Indian politics and Indian election processes. And he's also, I think, underlined the importance of the widening of the scope of governance institutions and the role that the youth and younger people can play in self-mobilizing themselves as far as resources and efforts are concerned. So what we'll do now is, since our panelists have already spoken, I'll take at least 4 questions for each of the panelists, first 4 questions, and once we are done with that, we'll see how much time we have for the rest. Can I take one from there, please? Yes?
Working? Yeah. Hello, Namaste, I am Shreyasha from Department of Design, IIT Guwahati. One second. So my question, according to my department, which is communication design, so how media and communication empower youth in governance and vice versa, role of youth in media? So this is my question.
Do you have this question particularly to one of our panelists, or who do you want to answer?
No, it's common. Anyone can answer. Thank you.
Okay. Any of you wants to take this? The role of media.
I think that is a very interesting question because we, with the rise of the new communication technologies, especially the social media, what we are seeing that is overflow. I say this overloading of the information as of today. So the role of media has also changed. You see, it's not just about reporting the news, because almost everyone is reporting the news. Even you with the mobile phone, a Twitter handle, can start reporting what is happening around you. So I think the media should also redefine its role going forward. It should become more analytical, more fact-based, rather than changing the TRPs. I'm not sure what is the situation in many of the other countries, but in India, I think media space needs to be much more responsible by reporting, because it is completely market driven today. So what happens that you are chasing the TRPs and you are following the sensational news. I think that is where I see a very serious intervention is needed by the youth to bring back media towards the issues which are more related to this community level, to the social issues, and also the issues which impact the majority of the population, not just some film stars, celebrities, and so on. So I think there's a huge scope there, and people like you can definitely lead it.
Okay, thank you. Can we take a question from this row? Yes. Here, the first one, the first person here. Yeah. Yes. Here. The gentleman here.
Hi, I'm Daniel Dias from the Department of Design, IIT Guwahati. And currently one of the few openings for youth to work in the area of public policy is as a researcher in a think tank. But since governments work through the civil service, the think tank's way of engaging with the government is through providing research and external participation as external stakeholders. So I have two questions in that regard. How much of this work is actually taken into consideration while during decision making? And secondly, what can be done to have more robust lateral communication between governments and think tanks?
Okay, thank you. The role of think tanks in governance. The role of think tank. Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yeah.
So you are actually saying that, as a researcher in the policy decision, like how much of it is from outside, the acceptance of it. Let me say you very clearly, like now the trend has changed. If you look at Indian government, and if I talk about Assam government, a lot of feedback is coming up from the, outside the system. They are the ones who are requesting for various changes, and it's happening. Recently, you might be knowing that we have a drive against child marriage. Then few months back, there was also an introduction of teaching in English in government school in maths and science subjects. Now, these are something which were requested by the, the stakeholders, like, for introduction of teaching in English in maths and science, it was by the student community themselves. So the policy decision is not always from top down. In present times, it is coming from bottom up. So in fact, we would like to request many of you to come forward and make concept papers and bring forward the kind of changes that you would like our government to take forward.
Thank you. The lady there, yes.
Good evening, I'm Chirantana. So my question is to Meeta ma'am. So how will the state and national government implement the empowerment of youth through education to participate in democratic and developmental activities?
Okay. I think one of the three reasons that I talked about for future is the development of youth in education and skill development. If every one of you, I hope you have heard about the union budget, which was passed just 7 days back on the 1st of February. When we talk of our nation, you are talking of Indian context. You must have seen in the union budget, it was a youth empowering and a youth inclusive budget, which means preparing our youth for the future. So the budget allocation which was given to PMKVY 4.0, if you see 236 crores. Now what it talks about is educating youths in new age skill, which is coding, AI, mechatronics, IoTics, and so on. Also talks about 30 international skill centers. It talks about a national youth the governance policy also. So if you go through all of them, I would request all of you all to go through it. You will understand how our government is actually very youth-centric and preparing them for the future. Because we believe, like, if the youths are conditioned right now properly, because they are going to make the change. So they need to be empowered right now itself. Right? So this is happening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman there, he's been put his hand. Yeah, you wanted to say, add. Not very much, yeah.
Hello. In reference to the question which was asked a little while ago about how to allow the participation of youth in the process of governance, I think recently I came across a very good example. Because in my university, I am also closely associated with the NSS. And I know that almost in all colleges and universities, we have the NSS group, right? And recently, the state government in Assam decided and eventually had a dialogue they organized a dialogue between the NSS and the Department of Panchayat and Rural Development. Now, what they are saying is that if we allow the NSS groups to work in close association with the Gaon Sabha, where the college or the university is located, and also in terms of the decision-making process, and also allow them to go through, certain workshop as to how to trace the spending, expenditure, decision-making, which are primarily nowadays made digital. So I think that, that initiative, which is allowing the NSS workers and volunteers to work in close association with the grassroots decision-making bodies, that I think is a very good beginning in the state of Assam, and that could be also taken up by other states also, and that will essentially empower the students to acquire the basics of how decisions are made and how policies are implemented locally. So I think that is a very good initiative.
Yeah, please. Can you please give the mic there?
Ma'am, you pointed towards me.
He's put his hand since the beginning. Can you please give the mic there? I will come back. I'll come back to you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for recognizing me. My question is for Sir Abhinav Prakash. Sir, being a very close watchman of student politics in my university, and for that matter, many universities, I have at times realized that student politics are also parallelly followed by a lot of unparliamentary or unethical practices in and outside the campuses. Maybe because in the Indian election we have a very strong election commission, but I don't think the Lingdo commission in case of universities is that strong. So what can India as a country do to set an example to make student politics watched by strong commissions so that such illegal activities do not happen? Because what happened in my case, instead of encouraging, the student politics discouraged me to participate in politics, because I found then politics to be a very polluted place, which it shouldn't be, sir.
Well, I understand your point, and see, that's the question which depends on the local administration, that how strongly are you enforcing the norms of the free and fair election. But the wider point here is that, when you are entering into student politics at the university level, you are also entering the adult world. So the student politics in your college or in your campus is also the reflection of the real world outside the college and the campus. So you cannot see the student politics in isolation with the wider political context and the social context. You cannot just reform student politics alone without reforming the overall politics. And I think, in that sense, if you see the political process in India, because I can speak for it, that over the last 30 years, there have been great reforms in how the elections are contested. I come from the state of Uttar Pradesh. In the 80s, it was very difficult for many of the castes to even go and vote. Now the elections are very free and fair, and that is reflected in the university politics as well. But again, that is you should not be creating a shielded space in the university and the colleges that when you go out, then you get a shock of your life. So I think people are learning, this is your exposure to the politics. And then when it comes to the other illegal activities, that's the question of the local administration, the university administration. And I think that can be easily done. I'm not in favor of having very strong rules and regulations in the commissions to regulate the politics, because that is negation of democracy and politics. There should be code of conduct, and that should be followed.
Thank you so much, sir. Your first points are really relevant. Thank you so much.
Can you pass the mic to the first row, please? Just 1 minute before that. My apologies, Abhinav. I had actually announced your name as Sharma. You're Abhinav Prakash. My apologies.
My question, hi guys, I'm Devnet. My question is for Abhinav Prakash ji. Sir, what are the major takeaways in terms of youth empowerment and mobilization in India for other G20 member countries? Some of the key takeaways that they can respectively emulate in their countries. Let's say we have Pariksha Pe Charcha here, we have the national education policy, we have the national youth policy. What are the, and we also have the incredible investment in the education sector as outlaid in the budget 2023. So what are some key takeaways from our youth advocacy in India for other G20 countries?
I think that's a very interesting question, and you have given the answer of, you've given some of the points in your question itself. India is a very interesting case in the G20 because at one point we are also a major economic power which is rapidly industrializing and modernizing. At the other side, we also have very strong development shared challenges with the global south and some of the developing countries. So India can provide in that sense that the keys or the solutions or some pointers as to how a country can manage this transition. And also when it comes to the youth, because when you talk about the transition, we're basically talking about the generational shift or the youth. So in that sense, as you have pointed out, that India has been encouraging youth participation in lots of these activities. I'll also add up this question about the youth in administration and the governance. So in India, we have many such things. You have the young professional programs, you have the Digital India internship, you have the Prime Minister Modi encouraging youth to work in the Niti Aayog, and also, you have the programs like Yuva, where you're encouraging people to write on different aspects. So there are lots of things which can be shared with the other countries. But we must also learn from the other countries as to what they are doing to encourage the youth population in their country in the governance and democracy. But again, in India, because India also can tell or share its experience of how to manage diversity. Because youth in India is also not a homogeneous community. India is not a homogeneous country. I think it's the most diverse country ever. You cannot compare India, let's say Germany or France. You can compare India to Europe. It's a subcontinent in its own size. So what we can also share is that how, despite being so different from each other, when it comes to language, when it comes to culture, when it comes to regional differences, when it comes to different kinds of ethnicities, how the youth in India are again together and have a shared future, a shared purpose bound by a common identity, which is the Indian identity. So how to force that mega identity which can transcend the local differences. I think that is very, very important, the lesson which India can offer, because we see lots of countries, lots of parts of the world have lots of conflict based on ethnicities and identity, language, where in India we have thousands of languages, right? Thousands of dialects, and still people are living together. I think that is very important, which we can share with the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry, I won't take any more questions. We are close to the end. However, I'll give the last word to Madam Meeta, because unlike most of us who are academicians here, Madam is a member of the Assam Youth Commission. And so I would like her to share some of her views about what are the things probably we are doing in the Youth Commission.
Thank you. I would like to share this, Assam as a state has a youth commission after Kerala. In India, I think we are the second state which has a youth commission. And importantly, what we are doing on the youth aspect in terms of, if you have been here, you have known that we have been left backward for a long years. We do not have the best of high-end quality education or the infrastructure. So the kind of changes that we have brought in is, having 2 educational high-end centers for UPSC coaching. In India, one of the top exams that the people go for UPSC, for NEET, for JEE, for CAT, CAT, and Assam is taking steps to groom our youths being educated here itself so that they are well prepared for coaching for the all India top level instead of going outside the state, number 1. We are also coming up with 6 additional centers across various districts of Assam. Another very important step, which we call as the Sarothi, is that a lot of our youths who are semi-skilled, they go outside the street to work. And COVID pandemic has brought out the crisis that our youths face when they had to return back to the state. So the steps taken is that in every state we would have a group called Sarothi that would be taking care of the grievances and the needs of all the youths of Assam going to work or study outside the state. Another is engaging with the youth clubs which are working on various aspects, whether it is drug eradication, whether it is child abuse, domestic abuse, child marriage also. So clubs which are actively working on these activities, these aspects, they will be handhold, they will be funded to carry on their activities more so that we can clear all this discrimination that we are having. Because when we look at the SDG goal in terms of the state, we are having certain areas to work on. Now, this is something that can be replicated by other states in terms of the measures that we are taking, and we are fast progressing on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have exactly half a minute to finish this discussion here. I'm very thankful to all the panelists here for bringing out diverse views on the theme of the role of youth in democracy and governance, the shared future. And like the fact that the youth, Abhinav pointed out that the youth is not homogeneous as a category, and our country is not homogeneous. There are diverse issues, there are diverse challenges, and there are diverse ways of engaging ourselves in the process of democracy and governance. On this note, a very big thank you to all the panelists and a wonderful audience. Thank you. See you in the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you, esteemed panel members, for this very insightful discussion on the participation of youth in governance and democracy. Next, may I request the director of IIT Guwahati to please come on stage and felicitate the panel members and the moderators with our tokens of appreciation. I request the panel members to please remain seated as we will be, please remain on stage as we will be having a group photo session. I also request the participants and the delegates to remain in the auditorium as we will be proceeding with the next session almost immediately. Thank you, everyone.
Please wait.